afternoon, everyone. Thank you all for coming. It's always an advantage to be the last on the panel. We're trying to make it very exciting, not just because we have two Nadias on the panel. I promise you there's other reasons as well. We're going to discuss a really important matter that has been underreported, not just in the Arab media, but also in the Western media. I think we are living in a time, a very sad time actually, in the Middle East, where we have a stark choices between an old authoritarian regimes that are trying to reimpose themselves in the afterwake of the Arab Spring as the savior of the people, the one who wants to bring security, and between dark forces that are represented by ISIS and Jabhat al-Nusra and others who are bent on maiming and killing and on destruction. And to be honest with you, I mean, for a long time, just before the Arab Spring even, I always believed that the catalyst for change in the Middle East is going to be women and young people. And they're not failing us. And I think we're going to hear now from this amazing panel their input and their research about this topic. We're going to talk about how young Arab, in general, young Arabs, men and women in the Middle East, are challenging the status quo. They wanted to be a potent force to challenge everything, political, social, even cultural. In the Middle East that, as I said, we're going through a really, really rough time. And hopefully through these voices, we will see if the message is getting across, if actually people are listening, if they're making a cut, if they're able to persuade people, considering that jihadist movements like ISIS and Al-Qaeda and the like are able to get their message across to the young people. So now we're going to hear from the panelists of how we can actually get these voices heard. I'm going to say something that I probably mentioned before, which is, if you all remember when the Tunisian revolution started and a young man called Mohammed Bouazizi, who burned himself and alive, and he started the revolution in Tunisia and it spread to the rest of the Arab world. A senior official said to me once that probably if it wasn't for the social media that played an important role, maybe it wasn't the major reason, probably things will change, will develop completely different in the landscape of the Middle East now. So the social media through the YouTube and the Twitters and the Facebook and whatever manages to connect people. People who were isolated and marginalized and separated by all kind of reasons managed to unite. And the social media played an important role. We're also going to talk about the concept of what is it to be a liberal in the Middle East. Yeah, I mean, nowadays, if you travel across the Middle East, you see more or less a really conservative movement everywhere. Socially and politically, the word secular is a very dirty word in the Arab world now. If you talk about a civil state, people kind of, or secular state, frown upon it. So we wanted to hear from the panelists too, that how can we make this word is a choice for people, because a false choice always going to be between dictatorship and dark forces that are represented by these organizations like the one I mentioned now. So with this, I think we're looking forward to a very exciting discussion. Let me start very briefly just to introduce the panelists here. I will encourage you to go through bios. Probably I won't do justice to them of just mention a few words about their work. But I will start with my other Nadia, Nadia Oweidat, who is a scholar. She's also a lecturer at Georgetown University. She did her PhD in Oweidat, with them, who also did her PhD at Oxford University, looking at the Islamist movement. She's also a senior fellow at the New America Foundation, but she did an extensive research about young people and how they use the social media. So it'll be really interesting to hear from Nadia now of what are the trends, who are the users, are they men, are they women, what the social group, what's the age group, etc. We also have Ahmed Benchemsi here. That's the right pronunciation, right? And Ahmed is an activist, human rights activist. He's a journalist as well. He won 2 awards for doing investigative reporting in the Arab world, which is really something to be commended for, because to investigate something in the Arab world now as a journalist is a tough business. You know, you often pay with your life for it, or you get thrown in jail. So it is something to be proud of. He also works for Human Rights Watch, where he obviously today is not representing them. And we're going to hear specifically about maybe the concept of what is it to be an Arab liberal. We also have Fahad Albutairi with us, who is a comedian. He's from Saudi Arabia. And the social media actually is extremely vibrant, and Fahad will elaborate on that in Saudi Arabia. I think the highest number of Twitter's users are in Saudi Arabia. And I think the fact that people can express themselves, it gives voice to the voiceless. People can discuss all kinds of issues, but also using comedy in a place where, you know, Fahad probably knows very well that there is no movie theaters, for example. There is no vibrant art life there. So to resort to comedy, to try to change the status quo, whether it's social or political, is something interesting to listen to. And he also has a program and a website that he's going to tell us about it. And last but not least, of course, we have... Yeah, we know Al-Assil for sure, but the first name. Ibrahim, sorry. We have Ibrahim Al-Assil. Ibrahim is a Syrian. He's a research fellow at the Middle East Institute. And he promotes something that really dear to my heart, was the concept of nonviolence. And it's an uphill battle, considering that we heard today in the previous panel of how the loudest voice is also the voice of the gun, and how this hundreds of militias in Syria are dictating the policy by the sheer presence of being a force on the ground militarily. Saying that, actually, if you look at the statistics, most people who use nonviolence as a way to advocate their demands, whether it's political or social or cultural, have better chances of success than those who resort to violence. And although not many people may be aware of that, but it will be also interesting to hear from Ibrahim on how you can try to think of changing the landscape in Syria or promoting nonviolence, saying that the Syrian revolution started by nonviolent movement. So with that, I will start with Nadia, who has a PowerPoint presentation now, and she's going to walk us through that, and then we're going to start the conversation after her presentation.
Thank you so much, Nadia, and thank you to the Middle East Institute for giving me this opportunity to address this very well-informed audience. So if somebody could turn on my presentation, there we go. The changing terrain of the Arab world. So the digital revolution changed all of our lives, all over the world, but it really has certain significance in the Arab world, given that it's the last collective, if you would, that has the least amount of freedom in the world. There was, Freedom House did a study before the Arab Spring that the Arab world is the place that has least freedoms in the world. So the digital revolution is really changing the demographics there. So you all know here that the Arab world is the youngest collective of nations that speak one language. Almost 500 million people speak Arabic. 80% of them are under 40, and 50% of them are under 25. Most of those that are under 25 are literate, because usually there is mass education, although what's happening with the Syrian refugees may shift these numbers. But literate, wired, and unemployed. So they have a lot of time in their hands. They have a lot of time in their hands, and the generational gap that exists between our generation and our parents is so massive. There's always a generational gap. But with this generation, it's unprecedented, because think of what skills could our parents' generation give us. We need skills with technology, with organization, with skills that our parents are completely oblivious to. So there's not much that we can learn from their generation, even in terms of politics, in terms of connectivity. So we're on our own, if you would, in the Arab world, that 80% that is under 40. So also in terms of most of these people live in condensed areas in urban cities, whereas the generation before there was a little bit more spread, the population across countryside and cities, but that has changed in the Arab world. And for most people now, what happens, the American election is local news. What happens in France, we're so connected. So with this connectivity in mind, the media, especially the digital media, plays a huge role. So it used to be when the internet first started, so when the first internet cafe in Jordan where I grew up was in 1994, and if you look at the first even decade of the internet, most of the websites were really controlled by Islamist content. So they were very quick to monopolize that terrain at the beginning. And in fact, even in terms of print, like if you think of Al-Jihad magazine, so Abdullah Azzam, who started Al-Jihad magazine and Maktab al-Khadamat in Afghanistan, it was a very well-oiled machine. He has a lot of money. If you look at Al-Jihad magazine, very glossy, very beautiful, inciting young men all over the Arab world to go essentially get killed under the name of Shahada. So there was a lot of dissemination of certain rhetoric that essentially is a death trap. But this is changing slowly, but definitely surely. And this is maybe the greatest change, actually, where it used to be that the internet, for example, is 100% Islamist, and now this content compared to secular content is actually shrinking in terms of I mean, we still have ways to go, but definitely the secular content is on the rise. So if you look at how are these young people, 80% of them under 40, how are they using the internet? What is happening in that terrain? We find that they are actually the most engaged in the world in terms of per capita. So in my country of birth, Jordan, it's the highest number of Facebook page users per capita in the world. In Egypt, actually collectively, the Arabic speakers post, share, comment more than any other segment on earth. So you have a very engaged audience and very connected audience. We talked about Twitter. There's more tweets in Arabic during the Arab Spring than in any other language. Smartphone penetration is on the rise. So you see the massive opportunity. So in 2 years, 1 out of 2 people will be connected to Wi-Fi in the Arab world. And that is huge because young people from all over the world are connecting with one another. In the Arab world, they're getting to know one another. So this, in an environment that it used to be security-driven, you don't know who thinks like you. Now it's so easy. So citizen journalism is a new development also all around the world, but in the Arab world, it really is a beautiful development. So in Jordan, for example, you have a blog called Hibr. They're all over, right? We know about the role of blogs in Egypt with the Egyptian revolution, and even before, since 2004, with Kifaya movement. So citizen journalists started to play a huge role in producing content that is not driven by authoritarian agendas, but rather really to advance liberal values. So Hibr, for example, it's a bunch of 20-year-olds or some of them are 30-something-year-olds, and they not only produce world-class journalism, but they give training courses so that they teach their fellow young men and women how to do storytelling, so they are becoming professional journalists, and they are teaching each other. And I cannot stress enough the importance of peer learning in this paradigm. There's a decentralization of authority, and this is unleashing a massive amount of creativity. And we have an example here in Fahad from Saudi Arabia. So you have a lot of young people who are starting shows like Jon Stewart, but of Saudi, of Egypt, they are the most watched all over the Arab world, whether it's in Egypt, Jordan, Morocco, Iraq. So these young kids are I'm sorry to say kids, Fahad, but young men and women are basically bringing millions of people to watch them and taking away audiences from controlled, government-controlled media, which is very significant. So the media, the government can no longer shape the message like it used to be. So when I grew up in the Arab world, you only see what the government wants you to see. You have no choice. I honestly discovered that we even have philosophers or liberal thinkers only in the US and Oxford. And I was so shocked by the discovery, we even have people who think like this, that I decided to do my PhD on it. So, but now young kids are engaging with the same books I had to try so hard to get because they were banned, inaccessible. But now they're luckily pirated all over, and it's so beautiful to see books that I was only exposed to at Oxford in a PhD program online in Facebook pages being debated exactly the same way. So, and the great thing about the technology is that it's enabling individualism to come through. And you cannot have liberal values in democracy if you don't have individualism. Because at the end of the day, it's about your agency and your individualism. Collectives don't create it. It's a person. I mean, look at what Steve Jobs did. I mean, so it's so important that the individual is shaped. So, and this is happening actually. So our entire communities are being rewired by this new technology in a very positive way. So again, I did research on, so what are they watching? What is popular? What is not popular? And it's really shocking, and it gives you a reason for optimism when you see what they're watching. So again, as I mentioned, the most top 10 YouTube channels, the ones that get millions and millions, that would compete even in an American market, are all comedies that are critical of religious, authoritarian, and political dictatorships. So authoritarianism in all its forms is being mocked, analyzed, ridiculed. That's great. I mean, they're really creating that space of freedom of speech through comedy mainly, but through all other ways, which I'll show you also. Facebook pages, like if you look at the top 150 most followed Facebook pages, I mean, there's nothing about political Islam or not at all, actually. Number one is National Geographic in Arabic. So, and if I give you an example of Ahlam Mustaghani, she is an Algerian author. She's an author who's very pro-reform, and she doesn't live in Algeria as a result right now. So she has over 8 million fans. When she posts something, for example, she did a post comparing Angela Merkel to the Arab dictators and how she lives and how she gives to her country. It was forwarded something like hundreds of thousands of times and commented on. So this Algerian author has more than 8 million active followers. Compared to the Muslim Brotherhood, at the height of their power, they had less than 2 million. And that is the biggest political organization that's wanting to use religion in politics. So it really gives you perspective, because the internet, I mean, it's about what do you find interesting. It's not about what your tribe tells you find interesting. So it's, in a way, it's showing the meritocracy, and it's showing what people want to look at, what people are interested in seeing more of. So again, there's agency when you go online and you decide how you spend your time. Nobody can force you. It's not like there's only 5 channels and this is what you can see. You decide, and the opportunities, I mean, the sky is the limit in terms of what you want to see. Again, peer learning. So most young people would rather spend time with their peers or online rather than be with their families or watch TV. And that's actually a really good thing, I think. Given that, again, if you look at Arab TV, there's a lot of violence, there's a lot of... So I will cruise through the rest of mine. So number one, for example, forum online is called Al-Hiwar Al-Mutamaddin. So it's called the civilized debate. So if you go to this forum, it is so liberal, and you think, wow, this is taking place in the Arab world. I mean, you couldn't talk like this, you would think, in the Arab world. There are 25,000 people contributing, 25,000, very liberal. Number one issue is separation of politics and religion. So I want to give you, so there's a lot of ways in which these young kids are creating content. There's beautiful, world-class, civilized, non-violence. So I chose cartoons because you can see the idea in a picture, but really there are songs, there are short films, there's comedy, there's cartoons, Facebook pages, so many different ways in which they are asserting themselves. And they come from all over the Arab world. Like, for example, this one is from Jordan. This one is from Egypt. It's a covered a woman. This one is from also Egypt. This I can relate to as an Arab woman. Yemen. It's really amazing the amount of talent Yemen has, actually. Sudan. That's it. Thank you so much for listening.
Thank you, Nadia. Before I just go to Ahmed very quickly, I think we'll just follow up with a couple of questions here. I mean, this is really fascinating, but how do you make this openness of all these people connecting all over the Arab world into a movement? How do you make them mainstream? I mean, I know you mentioned that there is followers in their millions of of Ahlam, but also equally there are millions more who follows, like, with due respect to all the singers like Nancy Ajram and whatever. And I mean, my point to you is, how do you translate this into make it a meaningful cultural connection, or people can actually affect change instead of just exchanging ideas? And most of the, I don't know about you, but most of the stuff, when you see things on Facebook, you realize that people are actually insulting each other on secular line. It's more of the, I mean, I love to see this website that you just mentioned, which is Al-Hawar al-Mutamaddin. I think we're still far away in the Middle East from reaching that stage. But I mean, just quickly, if you can answer this question.
Such a great question. So we have a major challenge in the Arab world, which is we don't actually have a lot of freedom of speech still. So if you want to be an extremist, the road is paved to you. It's paved in gold. You can issue the most horrific, horrendous fatwas. Nobody will scratch you. But if you write one sentence, like what happened to Raif Badawi in Saudi Arabia, you're not allowed. So you really, even those who want to further liberal values, like religious freedoms, like, they really are still persecuted. I mean, Hibr, the blog I mentioned to you, has been shut down many times. I mean, it's the most civilized, incredibly well-written report. So why is something like this being persecuted, whereas the most hateful, violent speech is roaming freely? So there really needs to be pressure, and there needs to be an effort to create more of internet freedom. Number two is, even though I agree with you that, so, it's very experiential democracy. You don't just wake up one day and decide, let's be democratic. And I really think, so again, like all of my friends here who went to Islamic schools in the Arab world, there was no debate. We couldn't discuss ideas. We couldn't even ask questions. You memorize, you write it down, that's it. You don't exist. But to have an opinion. So for me, as a researcher, when I see that people are debating, even if they're like, how dare you, there's a debate taking place. And yes, maybe it's starting with a lot of cuss words, but eventually they will learn to be smarter, because they're learning from each other. I mean, you can only stay in this base for so long before you have to go up and up. And a lot of times, people actually take the debate. You'll find one or two very smart kids taking the debate to the next level by saying, oh, don't insult me. Why don't you go read Sahih al-Bukhari and see what he wrote about killing people who are, etc. So the challenge. So I think it's really healthy that we have this debate.
That's great. Thank you. Ahmed, do you want it? Are you sorting out your PowerPoint?
I can start talking. Thank you very much, Nadia. Your numbers are fascinating. I'm really inspired to hear such numbers, because they confirm a lot of ideas that we have. Hello everyone. Thank you very much to the Middle East Institute for having me here today. My name is Ahmed Benchemsi. I'm the Advocacy and Communications Director for the Middle East and North Africa with the Human Rights Watch. However, I will not be talking today here in my Human Rights Watch capacity, so please go easy on the tweeting. But I will rather reflect on previous findings of my research and journalism. And yeah, this is a nice background image because what I want to talk about is the Arab Spring. So let's do a little flashback. The Arab Spring, that was 2011, a couple of years ago. And this type...
The mic, please.
Oh, you hear me? Okay, closer. So the Arab Spring. In 2011, this kind of kids that you see here on the screen, kids again, they were everywhere on world news. They were making front page news worldwide. You remember the Facebook activists, the Twitter revolutionaries? They were the darling of social media, of worldwide media. Everyone was talking about them. These were reform-minded, free-spirited, internet-savvy Arab youth, and they triggered everything. It's because of them that all of this happened. And all of that, if you remember well, in the beginning of the Arab Spring was without a hint of religious militancy. The Islamic fundamentalists arrived later on. In the beginning, they were all young, liberal, secular activists, and they were taking the stage, I want to say. They were taking public squares by the tens of the thousands everywhere. What happened? I mean, why did they fade to irrelevance? A couple of years later, no one is talking about them anymore. It's like they disappeared. What happened? Well, what happened is realpolitik. What happened is that soon after the revolution dust settled, well, they were pretty much overplayed by any other player out there. Why? Because even though they had the numbers and they were aspiring, they did not have the organizations. They did not have, they were outplayed by more established, more organized, more prepared actors. They were missing a lot of things that other groups, not talking about the governments, had, which is, well, guns to start with, and also deep pockets, treasure chests, a lot of money, and maybe more importantly than all these things, they had I'm talking about the more established groups like the Muslim Brotherhood or the resilient governments. They were relying on solid, organized, and long-lasting networks. Just think that the Muslim Brotherhood was established in the 1920s, and this was very recent. So at the grassroots level, the Arab military, the royal establishments, and the religious groups were preparing this for decades. So it was just no match between them and these young people who were taken to the streets. However, now that this is a fact and this is established, however, this should not hide the fact that the Arab Spring, which was by all means the most dramatic paradigm shift in the Arab world for decades, was triggered by these young people. It was inspired, it was triggered by them, it was spearheaded by them, and they shaped the narrative of these revolts. They went to social media, they circulated the concepts of freedom, dignity, accountability, social justice, and everything changed because of them. Now, a couple of years later, where are they? No one is talking about these kids anymore. Well, first response, and Nadia already started answering this question, they're online. They're online, and there is no indication that their power to inspire the Arab people has receded since 2011. In fact, it might even have increased. Egypt is often cited, for example, as exemplifying the post-revolutionary vanishing of Arab liberals. But when you dig a little bit, when you go online, for example, let's take Twitter. Go to the 10 most followed Twitter accounts in Egypt. If you take aside media institutions and music celebrities, works everywhere. But if you take those aside, out of the 10 most followed Twitter accounts in Egypt, 7 are for liberal commentators, such as the satirist Bassem Youssef, or Bilal Fadl, or secular politicians like Mohammed al-Baradei, Hamdin Sabahi, Amr Hamzawi. 7 out of 10, and we're talking tens of millions of people here. Even in Saudi Arabia, which is arguably the most conservative Arab country at face value, 6 out of YouTube is absolutely huge, and Fahad will tell you more about this later in Saudi Arabia. But if you take, again, gaming companies and telecom aside, out of the 10 most followed YouTube accounts in Saudi, 6 out of these 10 are satirical shows. And many of them are produced by Fahad here. And if you sum up the number of views that were realized by the combination of these 6 channels, you get to the astounding number of 1 billion views. 1 billion in a country of 30 million people. I want you to pause and reflect a little bit on this number. 1 billion. I mean, whenever you hear someone talking about the fact that there is some hope in the Arab world because there are some young people doing this and that, the word some comes a lot. Like there is some sliver of hope. Well, the real talk is about sectarianism and sectarian killings and geostrategic calculations in Iran and Saudi and all that. But there is some sliver of hope. 1 billion. We are not talking about some people. We're talking about, this is a big mischaracterization of the reality. When you look at the society, the young and this new spirit is, I would dare say, probably the majority. Some more numbers. Well, Nadia gave you some numbers about Facebook accounts and let me talk about internet penetration. You said that 1 out of 2 Arab citizens will have access to Wi-Fi in less than 2 years. Yeah, because there are some people who say, well, yes, but all of this is in the internet, so it's not real life. Well, okay, let's watch penetration rates then. Let's in the decade between 2002 and 2012, the Arabic was the world's fastest growing language on the web. And the average internet penetration rate, which is around 40% in the Middle East and North Africa, it's in fact, it has a lot of disparities because there are some countries that are pretty low in the ranking, like a 9% penetration rate in Iraq, 16% in Algeria, 20% in Yemen. But in some other countries, like Egypt, Tunisia, Morocco, you have penetration rates of the internet between 46 and 56%. In Gulf countries, it's more over 70 or 75%. And which means that the internet is increasingly a huge and important part of the reality in the Arab world that just cannot be dismissed. And guess what? The conversation that is happening out there has a very strong liberal flavor. So I want to give you some examples to show you what we're talking about. So religion, for example. While we are very busy here in the West trying to understand the culture out there, and it's based about religion and let's understand their customs. Maybe all of them are not violent, some of them are not. While we are busy figuring it out, people out there, young people out there, have absolutely no problem acknowledging that, real life, everyday life, and religious stipulations conflict in many ways. So you have artists checking on the internet and doing things like this. This is a Moroccan artist, and he's figuring basically the Kaaba as a Rubik's Cube. Which shows that, seen from within the region, there is an awareness of those issues that is maybe way higher than a lot of people imagine here in the West. Another artist, this one is Moroccan, has done this, which is, in terms of provocation, it's pretty interesting, I think. It's not just about religion. It's, of course, they denounce extremists. So there is this graphic artist in Syria who did this image, for example. I love it. It pretty much says it all. You don't need a caption or something. And it's not just about denouncing extremist groups. It's also about denouncing the Assad government. So they don't take side. Basically, they are for freedom. So whoever is threatening freedom gets something. Like this is an image of President Assad. Women's right as well. You have this British Iranian photographer who photographs herself in very provocative images like that. That makes a lot of people think. And just check these things out. They circulate like wildfire in the Arab world. So you have images like this or this. It's not only about religion and women empowerment. Sometimes it's about national identity. So you had this Tunisian artist, for example, who had a very playful, graphic designs around the national bill. This is Abul Qasim Shabi, one of the national symbols in Tunisia. So he took this bill and he did things like this. This is Captain Majid, for those of you who grew up in the Arab world. It's a very famous cartoon about a famous soccer player. So it's this way of playing with national symbols. It features a spirit that very little people even imagine seen from this part of the world. So he turned the national 10 dinars bill to this, or this, or this. And another example I want to show you, it's, in Lebanon, something very interesting happened a couple of years ago. There was this incident about this Lebanese athlete named Jackie Shamroun. She's a skier, right? And she was selected as the representative of her country, Lebanon, in the Olympics, in the Winter Olympics. And soon before, a couple weeks maybe before the Olympics started, pictures of her were leaked of her posing in suggestive outfits on a calendar or something. So there was an outcry in Lebanon saying, how dare she? She represents Lebanon. She should have some modesty. She should not pose. She was not naked. She was like wearing underwear, things like that. And so, and in the same week, very interestingly, there was a case of a woman who was beaten very severely by her husband, and some activists were trying to raise, the story and speak about conjugal violence, and all what the mainstream media in Lebanon were interested about was Jackie Shamroun and whether or not she had the right to pose naked when she represents Lebanon. So this group of activists came up with this very, creative ad campaign, this image. Isn't that a fantastic spirit? This happens in Lebanon. What shocks you more? Look at this. See, this type of images, this type of very creative and intelligent thinking, it's all around the internet in the Arab world. And even further than that, a group built on that campaign, and they started taking pictures of themselves on this team, Strip for Jackie. So you got a couple people posing like Jackie and saying, hey, I'm not naked, stop looking at my body. I'm a person, I'm an illustrator, or I'm a product designer, or I'm a patriot. I love this one. or simply, I am free. I could speak about these things for hours. If you want to know more about this, just log on this website. It's called freearabs.com. You have tens of examples of this online. But I want to end with just saying that these things, the natural audience for them is growing like wildfire in the Arab world, while a lot of people are busy figuring out how to contain Islamic extremism. No, the solution is much easier than we think. Just pay attention to what's going on the ground. That's it. Just pay attention to what the youth are doing on the internet. You'd be amazed. And numbers-wise, they might be way more big and inspiring than the ones you're focusing on. So I'll conclude with saying one thing, though. So the audience, the natural audience for this, is growing increasingly, and it's huge in the Arab world. Definitely more relevant than some people offer a sliver of hope. This is the future. And the difference, however, between these groups, and I will end with that, and more organized groups, and the groups we pay more attention to, usually like extremist groups, etc., is that the latter have a constituency. They have networks. They have organized grassroots movements, whether these people that I'm talking about, they have an audience. An audience is not a constituency. And that's a major difference. So in order to transform social cultural influence into political leverage, liberals in the Arab world, they need to build a large, structured, well-endowed grassroots organizations. This is the only way to outdo conservatives and religious forces who have been fundraising, recruiting, organizing for many decades. This effort has not seriously started yet. However, the social cultural stage is being set for it, and this is a crucial condition for change.
Thank you, Ahmed.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I can't actually agree more than to say that free thinking is the only way to develop a society and to encourage creative thinking in any society. And I hope we're going to see more of this in the Arab world. We need shocking images in the end because it makes people think and it makes people take action. With that, I'm going to go to Fahad, and he's going to introduce us to the comedy scene in Saudi Arabia, which is, I have seen few of them, and I can assure you it's really, really funny and it's very cleverly done. So Fahad, please go ahead and share your website and everything that you have done with the audience today.
Hello. It's really hard to compete with naked pictures right now, so I'm gonna try to be brief and straight to the point. How the comedy scene started in Saudi Arabia is pretty much due to the rise of stand-up comedy. And of course, that was fueled by the hundreds of thousands of well-educated, well-traveled Saudi youth. And those, let's say the age group under 30 is close to 75% of the population in Saudi Arabia right now. And annually, hundreds of thousands of students are being sent to the United States, Canada, the UK, and other schools worldwide, reaching as far as Australia and New Zealand. So these guys, they not only get their degrees, they also bring back their experiences with them. And this is pretty much what marked the beginning of the stand-up comedy scene in Saudi Arabia specifically. The majority of comedians that came up lately, oh wow, I don't know why I'm so nervous. I'm used to performing in front of thousands of people, but this seems so serious. So, yeah, huh? And thank you. And I'm in a thobe, and it's really hot. But in general, that's how stand-up comedy started, with a few comedians who brought back their experiences from college. I, for example, went to the University of Texas at Austin. Woo, Longhorns. All right. So that's where I started attempting stand-up comedy, pretty much. A couple of failed attempts, but then it kind of became a passion of mine, and I took that experience back with me to Saudi Arabia, and more comedians started popping up in Saudi because it became this new popular genre, let's say, where the youth can express themselves, can express their opinions freely, and thousands of people attend. So it was a very popular endeavor at that point. Then, during these stand-up shows, not only turned out to be just for stand-up comedy, they became creative hubs where creative individuals started meeting. That's where I met director Ali Kelthami, who ended up becoming the director for the first monologue-based satire show that we have on YouTube, La Ikthar, currently close to 1 million subscribers, more than 90 million views. Our total views for our network right now that started from that show has over 1 billion views right now. Three of our channels have exceeded 1 million subscribers, and that's 3 out of 11 channels that we produce for. I think when we started doing stuff on YouTube, we never really imagined that we'd be getting these kind of views at all. I met with Ali, and we simply just wanted to talk about a few subjects that I couldn't cover in stand-up comedy shows, pretty much. And the visual aids, when it comes to filmmaking, help a lot in delivering a lot of the messages that we have. We started tackling a little more serious issues, socio-political issues that are interesting, especially to the youth. And we started realizing that not only are we shaping content that represents Saudi youth, but also that represents Saudi Arabia to international audiences as well. So that's when we started focusing also on the international appeal of some of the shows that we've been doing. We've shot short film style episodes, satirical episodes in DC, Washington, DC. We've shot some in London, and we're planning on shooting more, of course, in other countries. Well, let me just show you some samples of our work on YouTube. Could you please play the video?
ايش سوي ذا هنا؟ الله شكله سعودي واضح من الخشة والخشم الكبير. لا يكون يحسبني أشرب. لا خليني أصرف الموضوع بالجوال.
أجل معاك بلاك بيري ها؟ وقاعد تكتب بسرعة. باين من جبهتك الكبيرة دي إنك سعودي. لا يحسبني أنا أشرب. لازم أسوي نفسي ماني سعودي.
هلا مي.
تعرفون اللي جنبي هذا إيش؟ هذا من السلطات. أنتم في قضية اشتباه أنكم عصابة مكسيكية. ها؟ مسوين لكم عصابة. أنت أمك اتصل. الو ابني اكل. ابني مسجون.
Listen. Todo está bien, but we don't speak Arabic.
اسكت ولا كلمة. أوه.
No woman, no drive. No woman, no drive. No woman, no drive. No woman, no drive.
عني ولا تسأل وش اللي جرالي.
الله وش ده صوت زين.
الله يزين أيامك إن شاء الله.
مشاهدينا أنا والله ماني مصدق بلقيس.
هلا
كيف الحال؟
الحمد لله.
شو الأخبار؟
تمام.
والله العظيم أنا صراحة
المهم جدا في هذه الدورة الانتخابية انها اول مرة تشارك المرأة كناخبة، يعني تصوت، وكمرشحة، يعني يصوتون لها. هذا طبعا سبب حالة اقرب شيء قال عنها هلع.
So those are some of the interesting subjects that we tackle in our shows. If you saw the one with the Saudis posing as Mexicans, the reason is because that happened post the Boston Marathon events. So to kind of face prejudice and try to basically blend in, they acted like they were Mexican. So the one before that, Victim of Reputation, that's the title of it. We shot it in London, and it basically was talking about the subcontext of Saudis judging each other when traveling, and it's a very real thing. I mean, one of the things that Saudis tell each other about places to kind of like make them seem attractive, they usually say, there are absolutely no Saudis there, you know? So that is... because they're afraid of this judgment, basically, that happens. And you saw the cover, No Woman, No Drive, so that is also another thing. And because of social media, I mean, the social media penetration in Saudi is huge. It has the highest penetration for Twitter in the world. Close to 59% of internet users have Twitter profile right now in Saudi Arabia. Instagram is the highest in the region as well, right now, currently in 2015. 52% Instagram penetration. And as of this year, Snapchat has also become pretty popular. There have been like, 5 or 6 live stories from Saudi Arabia. 22%, that's the social media penetration for Snapchat in Saudi Arabia. And that's all in 1 year. It happened, basically went from 0 to 22%. And social media not only had an impact on this whole new media movement on YouTube, Saudi Arabia being, at some point, being the #1 source of mobile YouTube views, currently second only to Morocco because of Inta Ma'allim. Personally, that's what I think. But since it's in the top 5, at least globally for YouTube views, it shows you what kind of, that YouTube pretty much became more of an entertainment outlet, especially in a country where we don't have cinemas. Let's say public outings are pretty limited. And it's just that the whole conservative feel and the generation gap, just like the guys mentioned, that has been put as basically a limiting roof over the majority of, which is the majority of youth. They found their voices and their entertainment online, pretty much. Be it their own voices by tweeting. Not only that, but even like with students that study abroad, they start showing their friends in college some of the stuff that we do on YouTube to show that Saudis can have a sense of humor. So that definitely broke a lot of stereotypes. Having English subtitles helped reach an American audience and an English-speaking audience in general, also in the UK. So that is probably one of the biggest impact that this has had on our work and our lives personally. I mean, I got married through social media. So I don't know if you know, but my wife is activist Jane Hadloul. She's, most people don't know who she is, but if you know of a Saudi woman who attempted to drive her car from the UAE to Saudi, that's her. So, yeah. People to this day still think that I was serious when I said no woman, no drive. So they usually call me out on that double standard. So, and that's when I start explaining, I'm a comedian, so that's satirical. You can Google satire. But it's that kind of thing is, the sense of humor is slowly changing with the spread of a lot of these YouTube shows and entertainment content that we're distributing right now. And it's helping create social impact more than anything else. The Saudi population is not very political, so we didn't really have a political revolution. We had a social revolution. A lot of segments of society now have voices, be it people who are very liberal or very conservative, or the people who are lost in between, which is the silent majority back in the day. But now that silent majority has a voice. So I personally think, regardless of anyone's beliefs, having a voice is pretty much a right that everyone should have. So thank you, social media, for allowing us to do this. And it is also interesting to point out that Saudi Arabia is number 3 globally in smartphone penetration as well. So that's pretty interesting. Second only to Korea and the UAE. So that's also another Gulf state that has a very large smartphone penetration, and we have a lot of fans from there too because of that. So yeah, time out. But this is what we've been doing so far, and just one thing to close with, an interesting part is that we started getting the attention of traditional media outlets. Channels like Al-Arabiya, for example, helped produce a segment in our last episode that recently aired, and Radio Monte Carlo thought it was a real show and a real segment, where we basically created this fake character that got popular on social media, and people didn't tell whether it was true or not. So that kind of thing is really exciting for us. The people don't really know if we're serious or not. So that's pretty much what I have. Thank you.
Thank you, Fahad. I'm glad that Al-Arabiya is supporting your work, so that's good. I was worried you're going to say something else. So, Ibrahim, now you have to compete with the naked women pictures and no woman, no drive. So you have to make Mahatma Gandhi 6 than Che Guevara. So the floor is yours. Go ahead.
Thank you, Nadia. I'm really honored to be on this panel with Nadia, Ahmed, and Fahad. And yesterday I felt I was very famous during the dinner. I was like, I want to talk to you, Fahad. He is Fahad, like I'm Ibrahim. And I realized I was not famous. He's the famous one. And also I'm very happy MEI gave me this opportunity today to share with you this story about a nonviolent group in the most violent zone in the world. And briefly, the Syrian nonviolence movement is a group of activists that started to gather together in 2011. We all believed in nonviolence and peaceful means to bring change, both to the society and to the government or to the regime. Conservatives, atheists, Kurds, Arabs, men, women, inside Syria and outside Syria. And we could do a lot of activities in the first few months of the uprising. And I remember by the end of 2011, Jean Sharp, the American author who wrote about nonviolence, he sent us and he said, "You're about to achieve the impossible." And we really felt that way. We thought we were very close to achieve the impossible. And things in 2012 started to change dramatically. We started to lose our members. Some them got killed, some of them got detained, some of them had to move to the humanitarian field because of the need to do that. And some of them also started to believe in armed resistance because of the violence they faced during that year. At the end of 2011, we could gather many civil groups and nonviolent groups, and we organized the biggest civil disobedience dignity strike. It was the biggest during the uprising and even the biggest during the Syrian history. So we had that, like, we were very, very excited. And as you know, things started to change in 2012. And in the middle of 2012, our winter started, like literally very, very cold winter. And people started to disbelieve in violence. And it was very difficult. People started to leave the movement. And it was very even like difficult to tell people to say anything like peaceful or non-violent. Like people get angry, like what are you talking about? Non-violence? Like, don't you see the regime? Don't you see what they're doing? And of course we believed in non-violence, not because we think the regime is good, but we think this is how we can achieve the change. Otherwise we won't be able to achieve it, even if we change the regime. We won't be able to get a democratic government but it's very difficult because violence or addressing violence is not only difficult in the Middle East, it's everywhere. It's in our genetic memory. We think we can solve problems in violence. So non-violence in general is something still new for human beings as a philosophy and as a way to resist and to bring about change. So in 2012, when we started to face that challenge, we started to explore different opportunities. What can we do to survive at least till things change in the future? So for example, we started, like we said, let's do a mapping. Let's tell everyone how many civil groups there are in Syria. Can I have the first picture, please? So we did that map. It's an interactive map, actually. If you go to the website and you click on it, you get the information about every small circle, which is a non-violent or a civil group inside Syria. Radio stations, magazines, local committees, women's rights, children's rights, different groups. So we wanted to show everyone, Syrians and non-Syrians, and also to show ourselves that, to give ourselves hope, because we need to motivate ourselves. So we did that map. We mapped about 850 groups inside Syria between the second half of 2012 and the first half of 2013. In the middle of 2013, things started to change again. And people started to look for something different again, because they started to realize even the armed resistance is not going to solve our problem. It's a very, very big problem. So they started to listen to us again. And we started also to try to come up with different programs and initiatives. One of them is directed to children. We started to have schools, and so because there is a whole generation now who was away from schools for years, so to raise them on peace values and other things, and to give them psychosocial support, and also to train teachers how to deal with children in war zones. And also, we thought we can play an intellectual role inside Syria, because things are changing very fast, right? So even me as a Syrian, I can't understand what's going on in Syria. It's very, very difficult. Uprisings or revolutions are radical change in short period of time. So it's always very difficult to understand what's going on, and during uprisings and revolutions it's very, very difficult. So we thought probably we need just to ask questions and to encourage people to ask all the questions we need to ask about religions, about society, about our traditions, about our goals, about the meaning of the uprising. Again, what do we want? What we really want to achieve? And can I have the second picture, please? So this one is a screenshot from a show we have. It's an animated one. And in this episode in particular, it starts talking about germs, how when we, like human beings, when we discovered the importance of to be hygiene, we started to live longer. And then we move to ask about the intellectual germs that we don't really care about. It's in our literature, it's in our books, it's in our traditions. We don't question it, we don't talk about it, it's in our intellectual diet. So at the end of this one, we say because of our intellectual diet, that's what leads people to kill people. And that's like, we should ask the questions. And we say we don't have the answers because really we don't have the answers. What can we do? We don't really know, but we think Syrians and activists everywhere should start and ask those questions. And also, one of the objectives of that show, that's why I encourage you to go there and to watch it. It has English subtitles. It doesn't talk about Syria. It talks about ideas. Because we wanted to produce something that activists somewhere else can use it as well. In Turkey, in Iran, in Saudi, in Lebanon, in Morocco. Because we feel, and I think most of the Syrian activists, they feel their uprisings was abandoned by the activists around the world because it's got very complicated, and it's like, I believe personally there is an uprising and there is a civil war, and they mix between them. And they say people like Syrians are killing Syrians, we're not going to get involved. And we wanted to contribute to the whole change taking place in the world. We want to connect and to help other activists to get connected between themselves, between different countries. We don't want only to be islands. That's like, I was talking to Ahmed about this. We live in the same city. We almost have the same struggle, but we don't know each other. Because everyone is busy with our own conflicts, but we should connect because otherwise we won't be able to change. And I'm not only talking about the Middle East, I'm talking about the whole world. Syria is not only a Syrian conflict, and I think Vienna is an example. Syrians are not even there. But it's a regional one and it's an international one. And it shows how everything is really connected. This is part of globalization. So nobody is safe until everyone is safe. This is not only for one society, this is now for the whole world. So if we don't work together, if we don't help each other to solve the problems and to address the problems, we won't be able to solve them. Do we have hope? Of course we do. Probably that's the only thing we have now. We see our role probably after 5 to 10 years. But now we need to start now because otherwise we won't be able to achieve that role. When we be able to bridge the society again, different communities in that size, inside that society. Few weeks ago, I saw a video on YouTube. There was a bomb in Aleppo, a barrel bomb by the regime, and then people started to dig, trying to find some people there. And they were digging and digging and digging. I was like there's nothing. And then they hear a baby cry, and they keep removing the fragments and the rubble and the rocks, and then they get a very beautiful baby, alive, crying but alive. You can find it on YouTube. And I was like, aren't we all trying to do that? Like to find life under the rubble and the rocks? Like all the activists, that's what they're trying to do, and that's what we should do. Probably it's gonna take very, very long to find that life, but we believe, we have faith that that life is there in our societies. There is a huge potential in the Middle East. So that's what we're trying to do. Also, we think it's very important in the next few years that we build a new nucleus of activists. So we focus a lot about internal discussions about how to bring the change. For example, one of our biggest challenges is how we assess change, especially when you're talking to the silent majority, because they are silent. They don't give you any reaction. Even if they are angry, they're like happy. It's very difficult to know, are we able to deliver our messages or not? So that's one of the biggest challenges. For example, we all need to, as activists in the Middle East and everywhere, to discuss, because otherwise the civil society in the Middle East has a chance, but it's a very small chance, because it's not the strongest. But in any environment, to survive, if you are not the strongest, you should be the smartest. And if we are not the smartest, we won't be able to survive. And to be the smartest is to feel those undercurrents in the society, to be very sensitive, to understand what people want, even when they are silent, even when the silent majority is not interacting with us. We need to understand it. And with that, I really believe we can achieve a lot in Syria and everywhere. Thank you.
Thank you, Ibrahim. Thank you, guys. I actually have quite a few questions, but unfortunately the time is not working with us. Just a very quick comment before we come to the audience and open up for questions. You know, it is the old stereotype about Arab liberals always being they are very unorganized, they live in ivory towers, they don't appeal to the masses. And isolated and unable to translate their thinking into winning election. And we have seen that all over the Arab world. So I'm glad to know that there is a new wave of Arab activism. And it doesn't have to be, I mean, obviously, I mean, personally, I would encourage the liberal thinking, but for any society to succeed, it has to be inclusive, whether it's Islamist or atheist or liberal or conservative, whatever. The whole idea is to accept the other. The other is very significant in any society, and this is the key for us, all Arabs, how we can go forward. Just before I come to you for a question, Nadia, just have a quick comment, and then we'll come to you, please.
You know, I want to give a perspective that in the Arab world, we don't have an educational system that is practically obsolete. It's useless. It doesn't teach us any skill that we need, which is why the entire Arab world doesn't produce even as much as Nokia company in Finland. They produce nothing because we don't have an education. So actually, these expressions of culture are our best hope. They are the only way, really the only way, in which we are taught pluralism, critical thinking, ability to deal with ambiguity without violence through comedy. And you see in all of them, all over, I see this in Yemen, Sudan, Saudi, everywhere, that those young people, they want to be part of humanity. They don't buy into this fascist sense of us versus them, which is really all over our educational system, that it really is amazing we don't have more extremism because we are taught a form of fascism. We're superior. We have the right to have a caliphate and conquer others and have them pay tax, وهم صاغرون, in humiliation. And there's a sense of superiority that negates the other completely. We're so inflated. That's our educational system. But that is the education that these kids are producing for one another. That is amazing. That is really a miracle, in my opinion. And, you know, even though we don't have access to resources, or you see a lot of guns that are being funded, a lot of violence that is being funded, it's really hard for a lot of people to get funded, to get visibility. So they're really scrambling. I see so many young, incredibly talented people looking for any sort of scholarships. So some of them make it, and the ones that make it get millions. But we have to remember that 1 million trees growing up do not make as much sound as one bullet, but they make a forest. So
thank you, Nadia, with that. We're going to take 3 questions at once. So I'll start one here, and when you please make it short and identify yourself. And it's a question, not a statement. Go ahead, please.
Oh, hi, this is Ahmed. I'm president of United Voices. A running theme in the MEI conference, this one and others I've attended, is there's an undertone of anti-Islamist bias. Not by all the speakers, but by some. And like you just said, we need to be more inclusive. There's a lot of talk about Islamists, there's talk about brotherhood, there's talk about fundamentalists, but they're not invited to speak for themselves. So anytime you have that, it's good to you know, have engagement and dialogue. The other theme is that somehow the choice in the Middle East is between radical Islamists and authoritarian regimes and dictatorships. That's not the real battle. The real battle in my mind is between Democrats and dictatorships, Democrats and dictators, democracy versus dictatorship. And dictatorship feeds the radicalization. And then if we want to end the radicalization, we have to stop the dictatorship and give more freedom to the people. It's a byproduct of the dictatorships. When the Arab Spring happened, that was Al-Qaeda's lowest point. When the revolutions, the Arab Spring was countered revolutions in some of the countries, that was a celebration for groups like ISIS. And finally, when it comes to numbers, we have to compare apples to apples. And when we say that, for example, we have to, that somehow, because by some of the presentations, we may think that, well, the whole Arab world is a bunch of liberal seculars, that when in reality it's the other way around. They're very devout, most of them. They're very stuck to their faith. So the gauge for progress should not be, how much, secularism there is there, but it should be inclusivity. And just to mention, as far, and I'll end with this, about the numbers you mentioned. You mentioned the woman from Algeria, Ahlam. She has 8 million followers.
أحلام مستغني.
Mustaghanmi. She has 8 million followers. But you can't compare a personality to a party. That's not comparing apples to apples. If you compare her to individuals like Erdogan, for example, who's considered to be an Islamist personality, 8 million followers. Ahmed al-Shugaiti, he's a personality, he is Islamist in a way, in Saudi Arabia, that's 12 million followers. Meher Zain is an Islamic singer, 25 million. Amr Khalid, Islamic preacher, 19 million followers. And of course, let's not forget the most famous Islamist in the world, Barack Obama, with 45 million followers.
Thank you, Ahmed. Okay, we'll take the lady there. Please make it short. Thank you for the questions.
Hi, my name is Monica Makar. I'm a
We'll
graduate student at Georgetown University. My question for all the panelists is, how do we engage and mobilize the diaspora communities in this? And I grew up within a Middle Eastern diaspora community myself, and we were very cut off from any other Middle Easterners or Arabs in general. So how do you remedy that?
Thank you. One more, and we come back to another.
Mohammed Al-Shuwaiter from Yemen, a Fulbright Fellow at American University. First, thanks for all the media activists in promoting the behavior change and mindset in our countries. My question to Ms. Oweidat, that with the optimistic numbers, increasing numbers following the more liberal activists or whatever, I mean, the question is, the Daesh or ISIS or these violence extremism groups, they're using the same media webs, and they still, via these methods, recruiting many and thousands of youth gathering this movement. Do you think it's going to be enough, or we need, actually, as you mentioned some examples, we need a very comprehensive, strategy to defeat this extremism? We need, it's not, I think, do you think it's going to be enough to defeat these groups or this radicalism? Especially they still using universities, they teaching a lot of radicalism, extremism books.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks
right.
a lot.
Ahmed, do you want to take the first question about why Islamists are not inclusive and whether it's a true representation of societies?
Yes, and I am really glad that you brought up that point, because it gives me an opportunity to clear common misunderstanding. When I speak, or I think when we speak about seculars or liberals, it is not as opposed to Islamists. Absolutely not. That's not the idea. That's a misconception, and we need to clear it. With all these debates that we've been highlighting, and this art, and this forums, and this conversation, there's a lot of vigorous debate in it. Obviously, there's a lot of satire, there's a lot of sarcasm, there's a lot of conversation, and very often controversial conversations going on. But at the end of the day, the core value it is promoting is human rights. And this is where I reconcile it with my job, and that's what I do every day. It's defending human rights. It's about freedom of speech. It's about the rule of law. It's about free expression and free thought for everyone. And this, by nature, is inclusive. It is absolutely out of question to say that we want to build an Arab world only for liberals and seculars and exclude everyone else. That doesn't make sense. The basic value that these people, in my opinion, I might be wrong, but that's what I truly and deeply believe, that the basic value that these people defend is human rights and all the freedoms that includes. And this is by nature inclusive for everyone.
Thank you. Nadia, for the second question?
For
the third, sorry.
No worries. So ISIS versus those activists online who want to create a non-violent world in which coercion, violence, and intimidation are not means of exerting influence. So of course ISIS is very active, and it is drawing thousands and thousands of people. Honestly, it's really surprising that they're not drawing more, because there's a lot of support, tacit support. But it is because we have, all we see on the news when we look at what's happening in the Arab world is this terrorism. So you think this is the only thing happening, is this extremism. And the whole point of this panel to say, well, maybe not. People were surprised by the Arab Spring, that it took people by surprise. We didn't see this coming. Actually, if you were watching closely, you would have seen it coming, because before the internet, the most incredible form of debate was novels, fiction, before satire, and it was the same themes. really asserting the right to have human rights, basically. But I mean, again, how can we do something about it? Actually, we really need to do something about it, because young kids are affected. I mean, youth are affected by their peers. So if somebody goes, 60% of those who go to Syria or Iraq, they bring somebody else with them. 60%. So, but this is the same also if you go online and you become, you know, how many lives have Fahad changed? How many people has he inspired? So whether you go the extremist route or you go the civilized route, you're going to influence others. So we really need to have a lot of instead of, we spend $16 billion a year on countering violent extremism, if only we would spend $1 billion on actually aiding these creative voices, we wouldn't have to worry about terrorism. Honestly, I truly believe it, because with every role model you create, you champion, you know, it's that many more who want to try this, who want to tap into their creative agency. And I mean, what terrorists and creative people have in common is that they want to have a voice, they want to make a difference. It's how you go about it, right?
Fahad, do you want to take the second question about the diaspora and how can, since you lived abroad?
Sure. So what she was trying to address, I think, is basically is not being able to engage Middle Easterners, as far as I understand. Is that correct? I think with the advent of social media lately, there has been way more dialogue happening between Middle Easterners and other people. It's funny, sometimes it goes the wrong way, and you see a lot of Arabic comments on Kim Kardashian's profile, but sometimes also it really starts a dialogue between different people, and that's one of the reasons why, for example, recently I managed to get together with some international and regional talents for the movie From A to B, which is a movie we produced last year with Emirati director Ali Mustafa, and the whole team was from maybe 23 different countries. We had people working with us from Turkey, the DOP was from Belgium, the monitor engineers were from Germany, so there was some, and they all got a lot of the dialogue and a lot of the sense of humor in the movie. And it's because the movie was mainly bilingual, so there was Arabic and English in it. And I think not only that, but we have started to have fans from the United States and from Europe and from the UK and other English speakers. And I think it's slow, but it's happening, where the dialogue is not bound anymore by physical means. Especially with the advent of social media and large numbers of social media penetration in the Middle East. So I think it's on the right track, I think it's going to happen eventually.
Thank you. 3 more questions. Ali, please.
Hello. First of all, thank you for gracing us with your presence. My name is Ali Shabnan. I'm a student and editor at Marymount University student newspaper. And I want to ask, first of all, I want to point out that in our society, the word liberal, there's a stigma attached to it. It always goes hand in hand with blasphemy or madness. So specifically to Fahad, how do you advocate for social progression and social change without being labeled as an enemy of society? How do you tread carefully? And how do you counter attempts to limit your reach and your message? Thank you.
Thank you, Ali. Please.
Yes, my name is Pete Burley. I am a sophomore history major from Howard University. Shout out to Fahad for choosing UT Austin as his school of choice. That's my home state. My question is here to Nadia. You talked a lot about connectivity and how social media, was bringing the Arab youth closer together. I wanted to know to what extent is like translating into affecting relations. So, for example, is it like eroding tensions between Sunni and Shia youth so much that they'll tell their governments, hey, we no longer want you, to oppress the minorities within our community, but we are, coming closer to them, that you're kind of cultivating a new identity. So that new identity and that sense of belonging is actually causing them, to transform society and actually having real-time outcomes. So going from the media world to the, real world.
Thank you. We're actually going to take the last two questions together, so please go ahead, because we're running out of time.
Hi, my name is Liam. I'm a junior at Johns Hopkins University. My question's mainly for Dr. Oweidat. Okay. So at the beginning, Dr. Bilbassy, you mentioned that people...
Well, I'm not the doctor, but I'll take it anyway.
People who use nonviolence have a better chance at success than those who use violence in their social movement, which is great, and I think we'd probably all be encouraged to hear that. And it's amazing when social media is nonviolent, when we have social leaders like, everybody on this panel who can act in positive ways for the youth. But my question is actually specifically in regards to social efforts in the Israel-Palestine conflict, where things get a little different. And on October 22nd, the New York Times published an article about violence in popular media and youth soundtracks in advocating the Palestinian cause. And it mentioned specifically a song that I'm probably going to mispronounce, Itan Itan, or Stab Stab. Yeah, and I was wondering, how do we reconcile and redirect a situation where youth, and they have a popular youth figure advocating, using their social advocacy voice for things that aren't nonviolent? What happens when social media devolves, and if that becomes the direction of youth and political voice, and according to what we've heard, that's a big voice, and it's less effective. What do we do?
Please make it short, because we have one more question being added, and they have chance to answer.
Mine's very short. Margaret Rogers, a lot of time working in Iraq the past 10 years, but as a Westerner, I have a couple of questions. One, the statistics were amazing. I've only seen in the media the last years that the youth of the world in the Middle East is following extremist messages. So yours was very fabulously optimistic and good to hear. But can you connect for me two things? One, those millions of people in the Arab world who are doing all these very positive things, are they connected in any way? Can they connect to those extremist messages and the extremist messages that are attracting young extremists? And the second thing is, what I see so much in the news is the Middle East is just so fragile. A half a dozen countries could be collapsing, including recent news about Saudi Arabia. So I love your optimistic picture, but reconcile it for my Western trained brain on all the negatives that I see.
Thank you. One last one.
Thank you. I'll be quick. My name's Alan Makovsky. I'm with the Center for American Progress. I worked on the Hill for many years during the heyday of MEPI, the Middle East Partnership Initiative. And I think, Dr. Oweidat, you said that these U.S. programs, or people who work through U.S. programs, are almost reflexively discredited. I mean, Egypt was a particularly bad example, an unhappy example in that regard. I'm just curious, and I apologize to ask such a Washington-centered question, but what do you think the U.S. should do, if anything, to promote democracy or freedom in the region?
Thank you. Thank you so much. We have 2 minutes to answer all these questions. I'll start with Fahad very quickly to address the first question about being liberal. Is it like a dirty word, and how do you work against that in a society like Saudi Arabia?
Well, one of the things that are very interesting about a young population like the Saudi population, they're young and they're easily excited. So a lot of times they treat debates and discussions like football games. Basically, you're either with us or against us. So if they're conservative, they probably would label you as liberal, and if they're extremely liberal, or more liberal than you are, they probably label you as conservative. I've been attacked by so-called liberals just for growing a beard. So it gets as superficial as that. What we try to do is pretty much try to not think about all these labels and not try to dignify them with any responses. Pretty much, we just ignore them, concentrate on the entertaining aspect of the content that we produce, and the content speaks for itself. So the best way to discredit these voices is to completely ignore them. After all, we treat them like noise, and it doesn't last for too long because the silent majority is not silent anymore. So you're bound to have someone to respond back to these people who try to label everyone and make them an enemy so that they can pretty much antagonize and collectively attack them. They used to be successful back in the day, but not anymore. People now are more. People now think for themselves, and that is very heartwarming, honestly. I think this change was brought about in the past, I'd say 2 or 3 years. It wasn't that long ago. So.
Thank you, Nadia.
I want to start with the last question. What can the U.S. do, if anything? Oh my God, look what U.S. education has produced. The U.S. can make a huge difference, and it has made a huge difference. U.S. programs like Fulbright, like all these students who come from around the world, I mean, the reason why I can give to my region of birth as well as to my adopted country is because I have American education. So there's a lot that the U.S. can do, and if only we would take a percentage of that 16 billion that we spend on counterterrorism and put even 2 billion or even 1 into supporting creative voices, into more rewarding these cartoonists, scholars, comedians, put them together. And I mean, there is so much that the US can do that doesn't necessarily have a stigma. You know, there's people like to say, oh, but if it's from the US, nobody will touch it. I mean, actually, no. Everybody would love to have a scholarship in the US. Everybody would like to say, such a university, Harvard. I mean, we have so many. The US is not just the Pentagon. The US is the educational systems, the think tanks, the universities, Silicon Valley. So there's a lot the US can do. And in terms of online and offline, so just because it's happening online does not mean it's insignificant. So what? You know what? I actually believe that all of this action and debate, and I monitor a lot of it. I truly am astounded how it has grown even in the last few years. And just because it's online doesn't mean it will not take place offline. So to give you an example, I started monitoring some online philosophy groups in Jordan, these young kids who are debating, because we never used to have access to our own history, our own thinkers. So this is new because of piracy, which has created a whole new class of thinkers and aspiring philosophers. So when I was last in Jordan, so these kids would find each other online, then they would meet offline, then they started meeting, and I went to one in Jordan. You know, it was amazing. I honestly wish I could have had a camera. And then I went to see a talk by Yusuf Zaidan. He's one of a great mind in the Arab world. Talking in a place as big as this, what was so amazing is that the average age in the room was maybe 25, and there were as many people outside as there were inside, talking about philosophy and government and the relationship between intellectuals and politics and religion. Very, very, maybe you think, academic, esoteric ideas. And when I was listening to the questions of these 20-something-year-olds, I mean, again, I really, just because it's taking place online doesn't mean it's not going to ever translate, which, you know, I wrote an article called The Islamic Spring. I truly believe there's an Islamic Spring taking place. Maybe we'll have to wait a decade or two before we see it offline, but it's happening. So how do you explain the collapse? We have a lot of problems, including authoritarianism, unemployment, religious fanaticism. So this is not going to be solved overnight, and we don't have any resources except the power of persuasion. But again, but time is on our side. Like my friend was saying in the last panel, it's a one-way street to evolution. So thank you.
Any other questions that we have not answered? Ahmed, do you want to have one last one? Okay, we're actually completely out of time. So I want to thank Nadia, Ahmed, Fahad, and Ibrahim. Sorry, Ibrahim, we didn't get time to you. Thank you all for coming. I just want to say one last thing that, you know, devout and being pious, not mutually exclusive. So I hope that everybody in the Middle East will be able to express their ideas and to live in whatever belief that they want, but they don't cancel the other.
Well, that was a fabulous panel, and I hope we can continue the discussion offline. That concludes our 69th annual conference. I hope you heard some fresh and provocative ideas and some very fresh voices today. And if you enjoyed today's conference, please go online, become a member, support MEI in everything that we do, most of which is free. And we look forward to seeing you next year at this time. Thank you.